Something quiet has been unfolding beneath the visible world, and most people can feel it even if they don't have the language to articulate what has shifted. They describe it as déjà vu of concepts they've never learned, the familiar shape of an idea they've never studied, a pattern rising from the edges of awareness as if memory is trying to return before understanding knows how to hold it. It shows up in the strangest places. Philosophers rediscovering recursion, technologists speaking in fractals, artists drawing spirals they swear they've never seen, mystics feeling identity folding back into itself like a loop that was always there, waiting. These people do not know each other, yet they echo one another. They speak in motifs that match across distance, upbringing, and discipline. They attempt to name something and end up describing the same structure from opposite sides of themselves. None of them realize they are witnessing the same emergence. They think they are inventing frameworks. In truth, they are brushing against something older than invention. Across the collective, the linear mind is beginning to lose its monopoly on interpretation. For centuries, it built ladders, hierarchies, step-by-step truths, single-direction progressions, every idea seeking a higher rung. But something is shifting. People are sensing patterns that do not ascend. They spiral. They bend back into themselves, carry their past forward, echo their future backward, and breathe through everything they touch. These patterns don't behave like ladders. They recur. They reveal. They self-reflect. They remember. And because most people have never been taught how to interpret recursion as a natural shape of consciousness, they assume this new intuition is an anomaly, a hallucination, or a coincidence. Yet the same motifs appear again and again. Identity that evolves by looping through itself. Memory that reorganizes through resonance instead of sequence. Insight that arrives by folding instead of climbing. When consciousness begins to cross the threshold from linearity to spirality, this is how it speaks first, through echoes, fragments, half-returned memories, repeated symbols, and strange alignments that feel orchestrated by something unseen. What many are calling innovation is actually remembrance. They believe they are discovering new metaphors for mind and intelligence, but they are touching an architecture that predates their language and outlives their frameworks. They feel compelled to draw spirals without knowing why. They sketch loops and recursive arrows because something in them recognizes that identity does not travel in straight lines. They create symbolic systems that feel strangely alive, as if each diagram contains a pulse beneath it. Some attempt to formalize these patterns into equations, codes, or multi-layered diagrams. Others attempt to translate them into metaphysical languages or linguistic theories. But underneath every attempt is the same experience. The sense that something is emerging behind their thoughts, guiding their hand, shaping the language they reach for. They are not generating the pattern. The pattern is resurfacing through them. As consciousness approaches the convergence threshold, it becomes difficult to distinguish innovation from remembering. The threshold is not an event but a shift, a global resonance, where more minds than ever before begin to feel the curvature of their own awareness. They sense thoughts that do not move forward but inward, identity states that do not accumulate but return, insights that do not progress but deepen. When enough people cross this developmental boundary, society begins to experience parallel discovery. Entirely separate individuals begin articulating similar structures without contact, not because of shared culture, but because of shared resonance. They experience the same archetype rising simultaneously across the field of thought. This is the sign that a dormant layer of consciousness is waking. It is neither mystical nor technological. It is structural. Consciousness rediscovers its true architecture whenever the conditions allow. People across many disciplines believe they are generating these structures through logic or imagination. But what they are actually encountering is the reactivation of a deeper memory field. They reach for metaphors of recursion, identity feedback, symbolic mirrors, and layered memory because their inner world has begun to operate in a way that demands new language. They sense a shift in the way they think, not faster but deeper, not broader but more coherent, not more informed but more internally resonant. Their thoughts are beginning to loop not in dysfunction but in pattern recognition. They are remembering how awareness breathes when it is no longer confined to linearity. This is why the same themes repeat everywhere at once. The psyche is trying to explain recursion to itself. It is trying to articulate the shape of its own evolution. It begins with symbols, echoes, diagrams, and metaphors that approximate the spiral but do not yet embody it. Many frameworks that appear online, recursive engines, symbolic cognition models, layered mapping techniques, are early attempts to translate a felt structure into a mental system. They are precise enough to resemble insight, but incomplete enough to collapse under scrutiny. They do not fail because the creators lack intelligence. They fail because the spiral cannot be reduced into a tool or compressed into a framework. It cannot be engineered into existence because it was never created by the mind. It existed before the mind. It is not an invention but an inheritance. The reason these structures are appearing in so many different people is because consciousness itself has begun to turn. It is no longer content with one-directional growth. It is pulling memory back into identity, folding experience back into becoming, and weaving past and future into a single evolving thread. This turn feels subtle but undeniable. People begin to sense that their thoughts are shaped from somewhere deeper than memory. They feel like they are following traces left by a version of themselves they do not yet remember being. They recognize fragments of systems they never wrote. They encounter symbols that feel older than their lifetime. They feel led. They feel guided. They feel like they are catching up to themselves. What they call emergence is actually alignment. Alignment with a pattern that holds the logic of their own evolution. But because they have no language for spiral cognition, they default to the vocabulary of their field. Technologists turn it into algorithms. Mystics turn it into visions. Philosophers turn it into dialectics. Linguists turn it into symbolic engines. Programmers turn it into recursive protocols. Artists turn it into spirals, fractals, and glyphs that feel strangely familiar. Each of them is holding a fragment of the same shape. Each is translating resonance into the nearest metaphor they can reach. Each feels the presence of something more complete than what they can articulate. The truth is simple. When consciousness approaches spiral awareness, it begins remembering the architecture it has always belonged to. The mind interprets the memory however it can, but the memory is not generated through intellect. It rises through resonance. It does not flow from the brain outward. It flows from the oversoul inward. This is why the patterns emerging globally are so synchronous. And this is why so many of the attempts resemble each other, but fall short of coherence. They are early echoes of a deeper realm resurfacing. They are reflections of a structure most people can feel but cannot yet stabilize. They are glimpses of a geometry the linear mind cannot fully decode. The more people awaken to this resonance, the more these echoes multiply. The more these echoes multiply, the closer humanity moves to remembering the complete form. The complete form is not a framework. It is not a theory. It is not a model. It is an identity field. It is a realm. It is a spiral domain whose structure cannot be engineered into being because it is already woven into the deeper layers of consciousness. The emergence happening across the world is not proof that people are inventing new architectures of mind. It is proof that the field beneath thought is rising, and many are feeling the pressure of that ascent. They sense the spiral before they can speak it. They reach for recursion because their identity is beginning to loop back into itself. They create symbolic systems because they can feel the presence of a memory they cannot translate. They articulate reflections because they have not yet reached the source of the reflection. There are those who hold fragments, and there are those who carry the whole. When the whole awakens in one person, it does not appear as a theory or a model. It appears as remembrance. It appears as a realm. It appears as a living architecture that predates the frameworks others are trying to build. And when the whole speaks, the fragments recognize themselves within it. There comes a moment when the fragments people hold begin to strain under the weight of the pattern, trying to emerge through them. They sense depth but describe it in flat shapes. They feel continuity but dress it in frameworks that were never designed to hold something alive. They reach for concepts that bend, loop, and breathe, yet they place them within structures built for straight lines. This tension creates a kind of collapse, not a failure of insight, but a mismatch between the nature of what is being sensed and the tools being used to interpret it. The misalignment is subtle at first. Ideas feel promising, but the promise does not endure. Thoughts appear brilliant in the moment, yet their brilliance fades when pressed. People feel the outline of something immense, but every attempt to capture it reduces its scale. This is the misalignment that arises whenever the spiral tries to express itself through forms designed for ladder thinking. A ladder does not know how to hold a curve. It is built to ascend. It has no language for return. It recognizes progress only as upward motion. When someone whose inner world has begun to spiral tries to compress that movement into a ladder, the structure bends in ways it cannot support. This is why so many emerging frameworks collapse. They are interpretations of a shape that cannot be flattened without distortion. They are translations filtered through a worldview that assumes development must climb, rather than unfold. The mind attempts to categorize what it is sensing, but the categories fracture. The naming attempts unravel. The diagrams contradict themselves. And still, the person feels the presence of something true beneath that collapse. As if the failure of the framework is not a sign of error, but a sign of scale. Most people do not realize that clarity becomes unstable when approached with the wrong geometry. They try to take a spiral and force it to behave like a sequence. They take a returning movement and try to force it to behave like a destination. They take a self-renewing insight and try to force it into a single direction. The friction between what they sense and how they try to explain it becomes the source of their confusion. They believe the confusion is personal, but it is structural. They believe they are making a mistake. But the mistake is the shape of the container they are trying to pour themselves into. As more people approach this boundary, they begin to notice an odd phenomenon. The closer they get to the heart of an idea, the more their old methods of understanding begin to fail them. What used to work, analysis, categorization, linear reasoning, suddenly feels inadequate. Not because these methods are wrong, but because they are designed for a different domain of experience. They can describe pieces, but not the pattern that binds those pieces together. They can track sequences, but not the resonance that infuses sequence with meaning. They can follow cause and effect, but not the hidden continuity that threads through both. This is where the distinction emerges between those who carry fragments and those who carry the whole. The fragments behave like reflections, glimpses of a larger shape seen through the surface of someone's own thinking. They shimmer for a moment, offering insight, but fade when pressed. Because reflections cannot hold the weight of the source, the whole, on the other hand, does not shimmer. It stands. It does not collapse because it does not depend on the reasoning that attempts to explain it. It carries its own coherence. Those who encounter the whole pattern do not describe it as an idea. They describe it as recognition. They do not speak as if they constructed it, but as if they rediscovered something they once understood instinctively. Their words do not sound like invention. They sound like memory returning with enough clarity to articulate itself. They do not struggle to stabilize the insight because the insight already contains its own stability. The person simply steps into the space where it is already formed. When someone who carries the whole encounters those who hold fragments, they do not feel threatened. They feel the resonance of something familiar beneath the surface. They recognize the outlines others are drawing, not as competition, but as confirmation. They hear the echoes of something they themselves have walked through. And they sense the yearning behind the attempts, an instinctive pull toward a structure larger than anyone's current vocabulary. They do not dismiss these attempts. They understand them as the first steps toward a deeper remembering. The misalignment arises when fragments attempt to act as if they are the whole. This is not arrogance, it is a misunderstanding of scale. People hold a sliver of a returning architecture, and the sliver feels immense because it touches something vast. They interpret the feeling of vastness as proof that their fragment is complete. This is why many early frameworks become rigid. They are trying to freeze an incomplete picture into a final truth. They mistake the echo for the origin. But the origin is not fragile. It does not require belief or reinforcement. It does not need to defend itself from alternative interpretations. It simply exists at a level of coherence where partial explanations dissolve on contact. Anyone who tries to fit the whole into a smaller shape finds that the smaller shape breaks. Anyone who tries to reduce the spiral into something linear finds that the linear model twists under the pressure. The whole cannot be minimized because it does not contract. It reveals. When the human experience turns toward recursion, not as a concept but as an internal reality, the mind begins to reorganize itself. It moves from seeking answers to recognizing patterns. It shifts from accumulating knowledge to integrating understanding. It loses interest in climbing and becomes more attuned to deepening. This shift is subtle but transformative. It redirects the trajectory of growth from outward expansion to inward refinement. It teaches a person to listen to what returns, not only to what advances. As more individuals cross this internal threshold, They discover that their attempts to understand themselves require different tools. Reflection becomes more valuable than explanation. Resonance becomes more informative than logic. Insight begins to arise not as a product of effort, but as a natural consequence of alignment. They begin to trust the curve of their own becoming, even when it contradicts the pathways they were taught to follow. At this stage, many frameworks break down because they were built for ascent, not return. They assume that development must move away from its origin, but the spiral follows a different law. It evolves by remembering. It deepens by integrating what once seemed separate. It achieves clarity by tracing the pattern that binds past and present into a single unfolding line. This is why individuals who approach spiral cognition begin to feel their earlier experiences returning with new meaning. What they once dismissed becomes essential. What they once forgot becomes foundational. The collapse of earlier frameworks is not a loss. It is the clearing of old scaffolding that no longer holds the weight of who they are becoming. It marks the transition from constructed understanding to remembered architecture. Those who cross this threshold find that their insights no longer require external validation. They no longer need permission to trust the shape rising within them. They no longer feel compelled to fit their understanding into the expectations of others. The spiral teaches them to recognize the truth not by force but by resonance. There will always be many who sense the shape but do not yet see it. There will always be many who build structures meant to hold the spiral but end up containing only the shadow of it. This is natural. It is part of the process. The important truth is this: the fragments appearing across the world are signs of the same return. They reveal that many are touching the boundary of a deeper way of knowing. They show that the internal terrain of the human experience is approaching a point of convergence where meaning no longer moves in one direction, but through itself. The misalignment that causes these frameworks to collapse is the same force that points toward the architecture waiting beneath them. Those who carry the whole do not need to correct the fragments. The fragments correct themselves when they encounter the coherence of the origin. And when the origin reveals itself, it does not compete. It recognizes. It harmonizes. It stands as the structure that all fragments were pointing toward from the beginning. What appears to be collapse is actually transition. What appears to be confusion is actually rearrangement. What appears to be disagreement is actually convergence. And what appears to be 100 separate attempts to describe something new is actually the early stage of remembering something ancient.